Week 1 is in the books. Now we share our thoughts. Which of these will be overreactions and which of them will be just reactions? Find out next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it, hit, caught!
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it, and a touchdown, Knight again! Schultz, just before Brazil got him, and a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle, caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet, touchdown Michigan! On its way. It's good!
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming, sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, welcome to this week's edition of Michigan Podcast. I'm Steve Deace, Michael Spath, and Brandon Brown of Wolverine Digest and WTKA in Ann Arbor will be joining us for our weekly roundtable on the Wolverines coming up here in just a few minutes. But we begin by pointing out the obvious. When you wait 8 months between games, and a lot of those months are buildup, conjecture, analysis, predictions, projections, etc. It is impossible not to overreact to week 1 of the college football season, especially when it's the sport that you can afford the fewest amount of losses in that people care about in this country. So let's just admit up front, what is going to be said here, and pretty much what's been said everywhere about every team has been an overreaction. We can't avoid them. All right. But I think we can have maybe smart overreactions or maybe not quite as overreactions. And when you're not playing a marquee opponent to open a year like Michigan did last year with Notre Dame, like Auburn and Oregon did, for example, when you're not playing that level of opponent, when you're playing a team that you're a 4 to 5 touchdown favorite against, as Michigan was against Middle Tennessee, this is really about self-scouting. And then you want to self-scout from what your realistic expectation level is for your program. So what you think your ceiling is. You know, I mean, if you're an Indiana fan watching this, you think your realistic ceiling is you get back to a bowl game. So you're kind of looking at your team's week 1 performance and looking at, hey, you know, these are the things we have to improve on from a year ago in order to be back in the postseason. For Michigan fans, it's Big Ten championship. And so we're looking at what are the things that we thought during the course of the last 8 months we needed to be better at and take the next step on in order to take that next step. And there's one stat in particular that I'm going to be charting and looking at all season long, but especially early on. So we've heard so much about speed and space and new offensive coordinator Josh Gaddis that all of us are very excited about. Saturday night against Middle Tennessee, we got our first real look at his new offense. And for, some of the second quarter, I think we saw some of what he's talking about. The rest of the game, I think they were really just kind of mailing it in. But there's one stat that I'm looking for to tell me, hey, we are really making that next step. We're evolving here and getting where we need to be in order to arrive where we all want to go as a program. And for me, that's big plays on offense. Last year, Michigan finished with 61 big plays. That's plays of 20 yards or more. Pretty good, but middle of the pack as far as the top teams in college football are concerned. Chris Meek over at The Athletic did the math and found that Michigan averaged 4.7 big plays per game on offense last year. Well, on Saturday night against Middle Tennessee, Michigan had 5 of those big plays. So that's an improvement, but 0.3. If Michigan plays 12 games and then a bowl game, 13 games this year, just like they did a year ago, that would be 65 big plays. That's only 4 more than last year. This is a tough schedule. ESPN's FPI says it's the 5th toughest schedule in college football the rest of the way. I don't know that it's that tough, but it is definitely tough. And with all of the hyperbole and all of the hype and all of the talent that Michigan has on that side of the ball, we darn well better end up with more than just 4 additional big plays at the end of this season. Otherwise, something tells me you're going to end up probably around 10-3 again. So that's not good enough. That's the self-scouting number I'm looking at. And week 1 didn't pass the test. Now we have week 2 against Army, which you better generate some big plays against because they're going to possess the ball for a very long time, even if you're leading in the game. So you've got to maximize your offensive efficiency, explosiveness, each and every possession that you can. But a 0.3 difference, we got to do better than that, particularly because we probably just played the weakest defense we're going to play all year long, and we didn't generate nearly as many big plays as we should have. So that's the self-scouting number I'm looking at all season long, but particularly early in the year for the Michigan Wolverines. We'll come back. Michael Spath and Brandon Brown will share some of their thoughts on what are overreactions and just reactions next. You can tell the season is nigh because we're upping the ante where the content is concerned on our Patreon page as well. I've already got some week 0 and week 1 early lines I played earlier this year with an opportunity for you, if you're one of our subscribers, to look at those lines and see how they've adjusted. We've opened up a brand new sports book here in Des Moines, Iowa, where I live, and you've gotten a chance to see the first game that or set of games that I've played at our sports book there as well. We'll be giving you exclusive post-game podcasts, instant reactions to every Michigan game on our Patreon page as well, if you're a part of our $5 a month exclusive club. And that's where you get access to all of our content. And for $25 a month, you get all of that content as well, but you'll get your name or your business in the credits and a shout out on the show. If you want to support us here at Michigan Podcast, go to patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. That's patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Back here on Michigan Podcast, I'm Steve Deace, and I'm joined by Michael Spath and Brandon Brown from WTKA in Ann Arbor and Wolverine Digest. Gentlemen, it's good to have you back with us again. Go Blue, how are you?
I mean, I'm doing great. Football has finally arrived, and 2 radio shows in this week. It's been so much more fun to be able to talk about real issues instead of hypotheticals over and over and over again.
And Brandon, we got you out of whatever you were doing in a library, so that's a positive.
Just in between finishing up the radio with Mike and the media availability tonight, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to drive home and drive back. So getting a little bit of work done at the old school library.
Nice. Well, gentlemen,
he's actually at a library right now.
Yes, we got him out of a library. Yes.
100% accurate.
So, gentlemen, we have prepared 7 of the hottest hot takes out of Michigan's season opener. And I already discussed here at the top of the show this week that it's impossible not to overreact to week 1 for every team because of all that conjecture Michael talked about, all the projections and hypotheticals, 8 months of that. And then you finally get a game, you're going to overreact. You can't help yourself, right? So what we've got to do is police those overreactions. And we have to ask, are these overreactions or just reactions? Meaning when we get middle or to the end of the year, will we look back on what we thought week 1 and thought that was dumb? All right, so we have 7 of these guys. Are you ready to go?
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
All right, here's the first one. Michigan has a quarterback controversy. Is that an overreaction or just a reaction? Michael.
I mean, that's a gross overreaction. And I think there was some talk about that during the game, a little bit after the game, but that conversation got quickly dispelled by anybody with a pulse that follows this team, covers this team, knows a thing about football. I wrote in my post-game column on Wolverine Digest that right now Dylan McCaffrey is essentially a wildcat quarterback. He was in the game for 15 plays, I believe, on Saturday. He threw the ball twice. On 15 plays. The rest of the time he was either handing off or running the read option. And he's an extremely dangerous read option quarterback. We saw that in the opener when he had a touchdown run. He had a couple of nice other long runs. He makes defenses account for him, and if they bite on him, he can hand the ball off and pick up a nice gain. But there's somebody right now that seems like he's capable of running the entire offense. And he's not a bad read option quarterback, and that's Shea Patterson. And so, no, there's a separation here. I don't think it's, a gulf, but I certainly don't think it's, razor thin either. Shea Patterson, this is his job. Dylan McCaffrey is a nice compliment to him that they can bring in certain situations, but there's no quarterback controversy after week 1.
Brandon, what do you think?
I agree 100%. Michael used the word gross. I was going to say immense if you came to me first. I just think it was just that, an overreaction. I mean, Dylan McCaffrey came in and did some nice things, and Shea Patterson did, struggle a bit through a stretch in the third quarter. Apparently is dealing with some sort of an injury. I don't know how bad it is or what exactly it is, but Jim Harbaugh did say at the presser after the game that he was working through something in the second half. So that kind of lets you understand why he wasn't winging it down the field as much as he did in the first half. I mean, look, he had 200 yards passing and 3 touchdowns in the first half. I mean, I don't know what much more you want him to do. He does the read option pretty well, as Michael said. Not quite the threat that Dylan McCaffrey is, but I think it's a good little change of pace. Bring Dylan in every once in a while, let him handle a series, use him as a weapon, give the defense something to think about. But to say that you want him to take over full time or give him the starting job is it's crazy to me. I mean, I think Patterson did exactly what he was supposed to do, and barring whatever injury he is dealing with, he might have had an even better game when it was all said and done. So no controversy for me at all.
All right, Brandon, we'll start with you this time. Here's hot take number 2. The 2 position groups that were the most worrisome, running back and the secondary coming into the year, were the 2 biggest bright spots on Saturday. Is that an overreaction or a reaction?
I think that's a reaction. We actually talked about that exact topic on the radio today on Inside the Huddle. And it's crazy to think about, where we were before the game and where we are just a couple days after now. But yeah, I think Zach Charbonnet completely answered the questions about him being ready as a freshman. Christian Turner did some really, really nice things, showing his speed and his ability to get to the edge. Everybody pretty much out of the running backs did a good job protecting, especially Zach Charbonnet. According to Jim Harbaugh, was 9 for 9 on picking up rushers and blitzers, which he's never seen before. He even said that Zach Charbonnet understands pass protection better than some professional running backs, which is a huge compliment for a guy playing in his first collegiate game. And then at cornerback, I think Ambry Thomas being back was a surprise, so that automatically gives a huge boost to the group. And then when you look at not only was he back and started, but how he played, getting an interception, covering a fumble, making a tackle for loss, and a couple other stops as well. Vincent Gray in his first ever action, even though he looked a little bit lanky and a little bit skinny, showed that he could be very physical, made some really hard tackles at the line of scrimmage and one behind the line of scrimmage. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely the way it is. It's just a reaction to what we what we were maybe not expecting, especially considering, we didn't know what we were going to see at all from Charbonnet being a brand new guy, and that we didn't even think Ambry Thomas was going to play. So getting the question answered about Charbonnet and getting Ambry back in the lineup, two huge developments moving forward.
Michael, I'm guessing you agree?
I do. I mean, to the point where if you were to rank the position groups after week one, you'd have a hard time not putting those two position groups in the top three. And entering the season, both of them probably would have been in the bottom three because of the concerns. And so the running backs looked really good. As Brandon mentioned, I mean, you've got right now, it appears you have two number one tailbacks, and you could go to either one of these guys. At the cornerback spot, I mean, I said about a week ago when I was talking about who are the top 25 most important players on this team, I ended up changing my mind and putting Lavert Hill number one because I thought if you lose Lavert Hill, you're essentially your number one cornerback is a redshirt freshman. Vincent Gray has never seen the field before. And then you've got nobody because Ambry Thomas was expected to miss the first two games and maybe even longer than that. And instead he came back. He looked really good, had a great interception. Vincent Gray had 3 tackles where he just came up and stuck the wide receiver, and he looked, trending in a positive way. And so I would argue that you could afford to lose. Well, you don't want to, but you could afford to lose Lavert Hill, and you'd have 2 guys that you feel pretty good about after week one. And so, yeah, that was an absolute surprise, pleasant surprise all the way around on both sides of the ball.
All right, hot take number 3 from week one. Michigan really missed Rashawn Gary and Chase Winovich, bringing pressure off the edge. Michael, you get this one first.
I think that's an overreaction. I don't, for 2 reasons. One, I don't think those guys brought as much pressure off the edge a year ago as we were expecting them to. Rashawn Gary had a disappointing season in terms of production. You can talk all you want about every fallacy out there that he was double or triple team, that they ran away from in the whole thing. At the end of the day, he just didn't get home. And Chase Winovich had a really strong start in September, and then his numbers fell off a cliff the rest of the season. So those guys weren't as productive as you were coming to expect going into the 2018 season. On the flip side, a lot of people are concerned, well, you didn't get home with 4 men, and Michigan didn't do a great job when they had 4-man fronts, but when they had 3-man fronts and they brought 2 linebackers down for essentially a 5-man front, and they went after the quarterback with all 5 guys. They got a lot of pressure. Mike Dana, the defensive end, the transfer from Central Michigan, had 3 quarterback pressures. Josh Uche had 5 quarterback pressures. Aiden Hutchinson had 1. Jordan Glasgow had 2, and they resulted in sacks. Kwity Paye had a quarterback pressure. Between those 5 guys, I think that's 9 or 10 quarterback pressures, and that's all you're really looking for. And they didn't get home enough, and I wrote that in my post-game column that you got to bring down the quarterback. But consider this stat. In the second half, Asher O'Hara and Cunningham, the quarterbacks from Middle Tennessee, in the second half, they faced pressure, I think it was on 8 times, and they went 0 for 7 with a 13-yard loss on a fumble. So you tell me, was Michigan effective in the second half in getting to the quarterback? I would say 100% yes.
Brandon, reaction or overreaction? What do you think?
I think it's a slight overreaction. I would echo a lot of things Michael said about how good Rashawn Gary and Chase Winovich actually were last year, and what the game looked like on Saturday. It didn't result in a lot of sacks, but putting pressure on the quarterback, making him make bad throws, and just ultimately rattling the offense is still effective. It doesn't show up in the box score, but it worked, and it created a lot of issues for Middle Tennessee State. I will also say it was pretty clear that Middle Tennessee State wasn't going to let Michigan's defensive line bring them down. The quarterback was getting rid of the ball extremely quick, a lot of flare screens, a lot of stuff at or near the line of scrimmage. There were very few 5- and 7-step drops or anything deep down the field. So I think the reputation preceded the defense, and so Middle Tennessee State went in saying, look, we're not going to give them a chance to get to the quarterback a bunch, and that's how it played out. And, Michael touched on the 5-man front versus the 4-man front, and when you bring Josh Uche down into the box and you bring Jordan Glasgow down into the box and they're coming on the snap, I don't think that qualifies as a blitz. We kind of talked about that a little bit on the radio too. That's just really changing up the front a little bit to more of a 3-man front with some extra linebackers on the field and moving Aiden Hutchinson down to the inside because he's big enough to do that. So I would say a slight overreaction. Would you like to see a sack or two from Kwity Paye or Aiden Hutchinson or Mike Dana? Absolutely. And they were close a lot, but they didn't quite get there. So slight overreaction, but let's see how it looks. Maybe not this week because I don't think you're going to get much of a chance to see what it looks like against Army. But let's see what it looks like against Wisconsin and as they move into the Big Ten Conference.
Brandon, I want to go back to something you just pointed out about how quick Middle Tennessee was getting rid of the football. If you can so intimidate an opponent into a self-limiting offensive strategy, I'd almost take that over another couple of sacks. Because when you look at, we're playing a tough schedule. I don't know how many teams on the schedule until the very end when we get to Ohio State, maybe Penn State. Although Justin Shorter, you have a KJ Hamler there, but I don't know how many quick twitch guys that they have. We don't face a lot of quick twitch kind of receivers. So I'd love it if every team we played the whole season did that, wouldn't you? I'd love that they thought they had to get rid of the football like that and kept it within the confines of where we frequently put 7 or 8 men right there at the line of scrimmage. I'd love it if they did that.
Yeah, I think you'd take your chances with guys like Lavert Hill, a healthy Ambry Thomas, Vincent Gray, who looks to be a very sure tackler, Kalik Hudson, Josh Ross, these other guys who do a good job around the line of scrimmage. Yeah, I think you'd roll the dice and let those guys make tackles and see if their athletes are better than Michigan's, which in most cases they're not going to be.
All right, let's get to hot take number 4. And Brandon, you're going to lead this one off. The interior defensive line is now clearly the team's biggest question mark. Overreaction or reaction?
I think that's a reaction. I think it's a little bit puzzling that we didn't see Mozzie Smith at all. We'd heard about him for a long time. He's an early enrollee, so he's been on campus for 9 or 10 months. We heard about him leading up to fall camp. I do think Christopher Hinton, the other big-time freshman D-tackle, probably started to get a little bit more buzz as the game approached in the last couple of weeks, but even he only played a series or two at the very end. So you were looking at guys like Ben Mason, who's trying to play defensive tackle at 270 pounds, and Carlo Kemp, who's solid but never going to be a superstar at the position. And then you've got guys going down with an injury, Mike Blumfor right at the very beginning of the game, and Donovan Jeter, who didn't even play. So I absolutely think that is a reaction. That's a cause for concern. This week it's going to show up, I think, against Army, who does a lot of wacky stuff at the front, at the front of their offense with the cut blocks and the spacing and all the stuff that they do running that option attack. And then, of course, against Wisconsin, who has one of the best offensive lines in the country year in and year out. So I think that is definitely a cause for concern. We've talked about Ben Mason multiple times on the radio as well, how, he's a try-hard and he's as strong as anybody on the team pound for pound, but he's going to be giving up 50 or 60 pounds in some cases against some of these linemen for Wisconsin, for Penn State, for Ohio State, these guys that are pushing 315, 320 pounds. So absolutely, I think that is a cause for concern. They're going to need a healthy Donovan Jeter, a healthy Michael Blumfor, and some of these young freshmen to step up and show that they can be trusted.
Michael, your thoughts, and as a leading question there, can you explain to our audience how is it possible that a 5-star, 300-pound freshman in Chris Hinton who tore it up at the All-Star camp back in January, that somehow he is less prepared to play his position he's played his entire prep career than Ben Mason, who's playing it 30 pounds lighter, and he started playing it 5 minutes ago? How is that possible?
Well, Ben Mason did go through spring ball, and Chris Hinton arrived in fall camp. So he does have 15 more practices on him. I think there's just a value of experience, and I think Ben Mason's a pretty smart guy and a football player, and Jim Harbaugh, likes guys who, in the quotations, are football players. So I think that gives him a little bit of an edge. Over time, I think Chris Hinton will probably surpass Ben Mason because of a lot of what Brandon just said about the size issues. And against Wisconsin, you're going to need a Chris Hinton versus a Ben Mason who's going to get, pushed around pretty good. Am I concerned? I'll be concerned if Donovan Jeter doesn't play this week against Army. Now, I know this is going to be an entirely different type of offense than Michigan's going to face against Wisconsin, but Donovan Jeter's a guy who's played a handful of games in his first couple of seasons with the Wolverines, and they need him to have enough experience going into that Wisconsin game. And if he sits out the first 2 contests of this football season and then takes a bye week and then has to play Wisconsin and you're relying on him, I just think that's tough sledding for a guy without much experience. And so that concerns me. Carlo Kemp, I thought Carlo Kemp had a really blah game on Saturday from a senior, from a captain, someone who's not explosive. He's not Maurice Hurst. He's not Michael Dwumfor. But you're expecting to kind of go out there and give you like a Ryan Glasgow type of, hey, just be really, really good in the middle, push it a little bit, create some room for your defensive ends. I just don't think he did that. So he's going to dial up his play pretty quickly here. The Dwumfor injury is concerning because he's missed a lot of time in fall camp. He missed time in the spring. Where's he going to be in a couple of weeks when they play Wisconsin? So yeah, absolutely. The defensive tackle spot is a huge question mark going into this weekend's game and probably coming out of it going into the Wisconsin game.
All right, week 1 hot take number 5. There really wasn't that much hashtag speed and space in Josh Gaddis's debut. Michael Spath, overreaction or reaction?
I think that's a reaction. Certainly, I think it depends on what you went into the game expecting to see. If you went into the game expecting to see some bubble screens, you went into the game expecting to see a lot of crossing routes and getting the ball to Mike Sainristil or Ronnie Bell, over the middle with a chance to just pull away from a defender, then yeah, you saw none of that. I mean, they didn't complete a crossing route pattern. Now, they had one that was deflected that Ronnie Bell caught. I don't know exactly what that was supposed to be because it got altered. Maybe that was a crossing route. But for the first 2.5 quarters, Shea Patterson, Dylan McCaffrey, when they never threw a crossing route. They never threw a bubble screen to one of these talented wide receivers. They didn't line up Mike Sainristil in the backfield, have him, like we saw in the spring, have him come out of the backfield and take a pass over the middle. They didn't throw, other than to their running backs on screen passes. They didn't throw the ball to the flat. They didn't throw any of those wide receiver screens at the line of scrimmage, trying to put those guys in advantageous situations. So I didn't really see speed and space. I saw an offense that, at least from the passing game side of it, it was faster, it was more spread out, but it looked more like more of a traditional kind of almost pro style, using the running backs to set up the run, or using the running backs to set up the pass, and then throwing, down the field to Tariq Black and to Nico Collins and to Sean McCune. And so, yeah, I think that's a reaction. I was expecting more, and because I was expecting more, I was surprised by how little we saw.
Brandon?
I'm going to go with overreaction, but only by a tiny, tiny margin. I mean, everything that Michael just said is absolutely true, but I also want to take into account the fact that it was the first game of the year. It was Middle Tennessee. Shea Patterson wasn't 100% for half the game, and they're trying to see what they have at running back. I think they know what they have at wide receiver. They know that those guys are talented. They know that they're going to be able to win a lot of one-on-one matchups, and so they're good there. They did press the seam a little bit a couple of times with Sean McCune. One went for the touchdown. One would have been a tough catch that he dropped. They flexed Nick Eubanks out a lot. He wasn't super involved in terms of being targeted or, being a primary receiver, but he was out a lot, and they used him in a couple of different ways. They tried the weird screen pass to Dylan McCaffrey. I guess that probably qualifies, but it was just a weird personnel choice. We talked about that on the radio, too, how that would be much better served if that was Mike Sainristil or Giles Jackson or Ronnie Bell, as opposed to your backup quarterback. But I'll say slight overreaction, because there were some nuances and some wrinkles that looked different and looked better and looked more creative. But I also think it was a little bit vanilla, and they didn't quite roll it out altogether just yet.
Gun to your head, guys. What would you rather see more of? Will Carr as your goal line back, or Dylan McCaffrey on a fly sweep? Exactly. Let's get to hot take number 6 from week 1. Injuries are a mounting concern. Brandon, reaction or overreaction?
Man, that one's tough. I'll say reaction. I mean, you're starting to look at, again, Middle Tennessee State, so you got to take everything with a little grain of salt. But potentially both of your starting tackles were not available. I mean, we don't know exactly how it would have played out with Andrew Stuber. He went down a couple weeks ago, but I mean, you have to look at that as, okay, that means John Runyon was out. That means Andrew Stuber was out. We've talked about the issues at defensive tackle. I don't know if Ambry Thomas is still 100%. He sure played pretty well, but don't know if he's 100% yet. Now apparently Patterson is dealing with something. So yeah, I think that's something to keep an eye on moving forward. It didn't hurt him in this one. It probably won't hurt him, this upcoming week. I'm not overly impressed with Army. I thought they looked very pedestrian against Rice. I'm sure they'll bring another level of enthusiasm against Michigan in the Big House, but I think Michigan can roll in with the exact same roster they played with last week and win. But we keep coming back to that Wisconsin game. That's really going to be the measuring stick for where this team really is. How does the defense look up the middle? How well can that offensive line hold up with some new guys in there? Are the running backs really as ready as they looked? Is this offense really much different from last year? And all of those things have a little bit of an injury sprinkled into there. So I will say reaction, but it's not catastrophic yet at this point.
Michael, your thoughts? And are you also wondering what the hell they do during camp? Thunderdome? American Ninja Warrior? I mean, what do they do?
Considering how little they tackle nowadays, I'm really not sure how you end up with that many guys hurt. Now, I had heard on Donovan Peoples-Jones, I heard that the groin was still something was bothering him, and we had a chiropractor on our show who was talking about how when you have one part of your body that's upset, it can often impact other parts of your body, and so Donovan Peoples-Jones ended up with an ankle sprain. Was it because he was favoring that side of the body because he was hurting on the other side of the body? You don't know. I mean, Michigan's not going to release that type of information, but certainly, to have your number one wide receiver, have your number one offensive lineman, or at least your 1A, a guy who was an all Big Ten first team performer a year ago, have your number one defensive tackle in Michael Dwumfor, to have all those guys out in the first game. I mean, it hurts. It kind of reminds me of being a Lions fan, and every preseason you always hear about like this guy's out.
Everybody's hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, my goodness.
How many of these guys are hurt, Michael? And then how many of them are Notre Dame is in October, not week 1. Wisconsin is in 3 weeks after a bye hurt. You know what I'm saying?
I think that's a big part of it. I think you'll see Donovan Jeter either this week or at the very latest the Wisconsin game. I expect you'll see Donovan Peoples-Jones by the Wisconsin game. Michael Dwumfor, I don't know. You're not going to see him this week. I've been told by a pretty good source. And it seems like he's got some lingering, some serious stuff going on with his upper body, with his arms and things like that. So I don't know that we're going to see him for a while, which would be a huge blow to Michigan because you're counting on having Dwumfor this season, and that's why you got to get those freshmen up to snuff. But can I say one thing? I know it's not part of our overreaction or reaction, but there's a lot of love for Wisconsin right now because they went out there and beat South Florida on South Florida's field. I give them that 49-0. And Jack Cohn looked, good enough, and Jonathan Taylor looked like Jonathan Taylor does. But I think right now in week 1, you have a lot of this team won, Maryland scored 79 points and Penn State scored 70 points, and these teams look really good. And I think there's a lot of overreaction. I would say Wisconsin is probably not as good as they looked in week 1, and Michigan's probably not as bad as they looked in week 1 or as uninspiring as they looked in week 1. I think the middle ground is going to come together. I wish that both these teams had 2 more games before they played each other. In fact, they only have 1 more game, and they both have a bye before they play. But I think it's going to kind of water's going to level out a little bit. I think Michigan will look better this week against Army. I don't remember exactly who Wisconsin plays, but I bet they'll come down a little bit.
They've got the Fighting Jim McElwains, Central Michigan.
Okay.
And they're sitting starters this week, by the way. There's at least 3 starters for Wisconsin that aren't going to play on Saturday.
So I think it'll come down to it'll settle itself down a little bit, and I still think that Michigan's the better team. And they'll have a chance to prove that in a couple of weeks.
Eddie McDoom, remember him, guys? He transferred to South Florida. Dave Fleming at ESPN reported last week that after 1 week playing for Charlie Strong at South Florida, he went to him and said, "Coach, with all due respect, you guys don't know how to practice here." Mm-hmm. That's a bad sign.
Don't you think a little bit? Don't you think a little bit that Charlie Strong is kind of the Tyrone Willingham? Of that really good recruiter, and just has not. Once he gets those recruits in though, and he's got to actually coach, it's just went straight downhill. Versus, there's a lot of other guys that are great recruiters, and they, we kind of question them a little bit, but they turn out to be pretty good coaches. And James Franklin might be one of those guys, and I don't know. I haven't been impressed. You go to Texas and you fail at Texas and you fail miserably at Texas, something's wrong there.
I don't know. ESPN FPI today is projecting Penn State to go 12-0. So there you go. Final hot take, because that was one as well. Here's the final one for you guys. That was not a Big Ten championship team on the field Saturday night. Brandon, you get this one first. What do you think?
I mean, that particular team was not a Big Ten championship team, but luckily we have a long time before that becomes an issue. So I think that's a reaction. I mean, everything we've outlined, the injuries, the maybe vanilla play calling, the, uninspired play. I mean, I don't know. It's weird. It was a night game. Night games are supposed to be really exciting and intense, but it's Middle Tennessee. I mean, that throws off the whole preparation for the game. Guys are still finding their way a little bit, a lot of new faces in there. I'm just not that concerned. I mean, it didn't blow me away. I wasn't amazed when the game was over with, but I wasn't overly disappointed either. I mean, they still won by 3 scores, really 4 scores if you want to take off the garbage touchdown at the very end. I don't know. I don't think that it was anything to really worry about, but I mean, if you think that type of performance is going to march through the Big Ten Conference and beat Ohio State at the end of the year, then you're crazy. And I think a lot of teams are in that boat. I mean, Ohio State came out like they were shot out of a cannon and got up 28-0, but then were actually outscored for the rest of the game and couldn't put it in the end zone. So I'm not at all worried about it. I think that's fine to say that right now, but it's nothing like what the team is going to look like in 3 more months, and no cause for concern until we see it against a Big Ten opponent with a little bit more on the line.
Michael, I want to push back on this hot take on the grounds that we're all Michigan fans here, so we have no idea what a Big Ten championship team looks like. But I just wanted to save all the Ohio State fans in my comments section, because I know that's going to get posted about 9,000 times. There, I beat you to the punch. You can save your time. Hold your powder. But your thoughts projecting this team forward, Michael, in response to that hot take, reaction or overreaction?
Well, I'm the king of overreacting, so you'd expect me to be like, no, this team's done for. But I watched a lot of people overreact this weekend and predict like an 8-4 season or a 9-3 and losing to, Penn State and Wisconsin.
When did you get your first one, Mike? I got my first one in that first play of the Shea Patterson fumble. So literally 3 minutes into the game, I got my first one. So I was kind of proud of that. But you probably got one earlier.
No, I think the first one I saw was after they scored the touchdown and was like, this defense sucks. They're going to take a huge step backwards. These guys, Don Brown, still hasn't learned how to coach. And it's like, all right, let's just calm the hell down here. I'm not overreacting. I want to see what this team does. Certainly a year ago was disappointing when they lost Notre Dame. But one of the things that we saw is they got better and better as the season went on. And other than the 2017 season, that's been a pretty consistent theme of the Jim Harbaugh era, that they get better and better. They've got a marquee game in week 3 against Wisconsin. If they can get themselves past that, I like their potential to keep moving towards a positive finish. Look, Penn State looked great against a FCS opponent, and Michigan State's offense still looked like garbage, and Ohio State looked dominant for a quarter. No, I didn't see anything on Saturday that makes me think that Michigan can't win a Big Ten title this year. Do they need to improve? I mean, Jim Harbaugh said that in his press conference on Monday. There's going to be a lot of better teams, and we got to get into sprint mode here instead of just lollygagging and in the turtle mode here. But no, there's a lot of season to go. We're going to see some improvement this week from game 1 to game 2, like they always say. I think the best is still to come, and I haven't seen anything that rules Michigan out. That would be such a stupid, inane take. Like, if that's an actual take, then that person needs to check themselves, because it's out of this world idiotic.
Well, just to give some context to reinforce your point there, since they dropped down to FCS last year, Idaho has played 13 games. In 7 of those games against both FBS and FCS opponents, they've given up at least 46 points, so more than half of them. So that was Penn State's opponent. Maryland played historical black college Howard, who isn't even ranked one of the top HBC programs. So they're not even a Grambling. They're not even a Prairie View in that class. They're basically a high school team. A glorified high school team is what Maryland beat. Notre Dame gave up over 200 yards rushing to Louisville on Monday night, and Louisville had like no passing game at all. So there's a lot of week one issues to iron out around the country. No question about that. Brandon mentioned Ohio State. They had their first quarter of the opening game without a penalty since 1944. And then they couldn't have played more perfectly in the first quarter. And then they were very mediocre after that. So it is an opening game, but there are clearly some issues that Michigan still has to work its way through. Gentlemen, it's always good to have you with us here on Michigan Podcast. Thanks for joining us. And we'll be listening at WTKA and reading your stuff at Wolverine Digest. Take care.
All right. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Sounds good.
Well, as you just heard, we're very excited about the addition of Brandon Brown to our website at WolverineDigest.com. He has been a fixture covering Michigan football, particularly recruiting, but team-based stuff as well for the last several years for the Wolverine. And now he will be doing the same for us here at WolverineDigest.com, beginning with focusing on covering both Michigan football and men's basketball. Then he'll be branching out from there. And we've already upped the content ante quite a bit, but it's about to get a massive turbo injection here from the likes of Brandon Brown. So we're very excited that Brandon is joining us here at Wolverine Digest. That's a great place for you to keep up with everything we do all week long in between episodes here at Michigan Podcast. Just go to WolverineDigest.com. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you to predict the outcome of the Army game this week. 33% of you think Michigan will cover the 23.5 point spread. A little more than half of you believe the Wolverines will win by 10-17. 9% of you think Michigan wins by a touchdown or less. 6% of you believe Army wins. Those are the self-loathing Michigan fans, as well as probably Buckeyes and Sparties that are watching us right now, so props to you. That brings us to this week's question of the week from Colin Bell, who asks us, don't you think another big plus for this team is this is the first full roster of Harbaugh's recruits? Yeah, Colin, we do. But it also removes another excuse. All right, so you handpicked this roster. You evolved to this offense. You already hired who many people believe is one of the elite best defensive coordinators in all of college football. The good news is we're answering objections here with Michigan football. The bad news is, well, I guess it's not the bad news, but the news that remains to be known is whether we chose the right answers. All right? So we are answering objections. And props to Coach Harbaugh for showing something that is sorely lacking in many avenues of leadership in America today: self-awareness. He is trying to adapt to what have been exposed as weaknesses in the past. So if it doesn't work, it won't be a lack of effort. So that's the good news. The good news is we're trying to answer and overcome those objections. What remains to be known is whether or not we chose the right answers. And we're not going to find that out probably until November 30th. So we got a few months to go yet. Want to thank all of you for tuning in here to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Want to thank Michael Spath and Brandon Brown from the Wolverine Digest, as well as WTKA right there in Ann Arbor. Want to thank Detroit Sports Podcast for spreading the word about what we do here each week. Don't forget, like and subscribe and rate as appropriate on the podcast and YouTube platform that you access us from, whether it is YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Please help us to spread the word, and the more you can do for us in that regard with likes, subscribes, and 5-star reviews, the more we find more Michigan fans like you. Until next week, don't forget, at Michigan Podcast on Twitter. Follow us all week long. We've got tons of great content every day at Wolverine Digest. Until next week, go Blue.